Learn VR/MR. Come to the Spatial XR community.
Next, I'll demonstrate some other key bindings. Now, I want to check whether the A button on the Quest's right controller is being pressed. Here, I can add another action in this input action map and name it Testa. Since I want to check whether the A button on the controller is pressed, I'll set the action type to button, as it is specifically designed to determine whether a button is pressed. Then I'll bind a key to this action. Navigate to XR Controller. Select right hand, expand usages, and find the key that corresponds to the A button on the right controller, which is the primary button type. This type represents both the A button on the right controller and the X button on the left controller. We can specify left hand or right hand under XR Controller to determine whether the primary button refers to the X button on the left controller or the A button on the right controller. Since I have now specified right hand, the primary button directly refers to the A button on the right controller. When configuring this key input earlier, in addition to primary button, we also saw secondary button listed below it. The secondary button represents the Y button on the left controller or the B button on the right controller. It will determine exactly which button the secondary button refers to based on whether we select left hand or right hand here. Using the official Vive controller button map can help everyone understand this better. The X button on the left controller and the A button on the right controller are represented by primary button, while the Y button on the left controller and the B button on the right controller are represented by secondary button. The button structure of the Vive controller is the same as that of the Quest controller, so we can directly refer to it. After configuring the action for pressing the A button on the right controller, the next step is to access this action in the code. In the XR input test script, we declare a public variable of type input_action_reference and name it Testa. When this action is triggered, we bind it to a method that needs to be executed. The implementation is similar to the previous approach. Then, in the Testa method, we output a message. Right controller A button pressed. If the program is working correctly, this message will be displayed whenever we press the A button on the right controller. Back in Unity, we link the newly created variable to the corresponding action. For testa, reference the testa action that we just configured. After running the program, pressing the A button on the right controller will display this message in the console. Each time you press the button, the message will be output again, confirming that the A button on the controller has been correctly bound. Next, I'll demonstrate how to bind the menu button on the Quest's left controller. Open the official Quest documentation and locate the menu button on the left controller. It's this button. The Wave controller has the same button structure, so it's consistent. In the input configuration file, add a new action named Test Menu and set the action type to Button, as we only need to check whether the menu button is pressed. Then, bind this action to the menu button. In the Path section, configure the setting by opening the first level of usages, as the menu button only exists on the left controller, so there's no need to specify left hand or right hand. In the Usages panel, find Menu Button, which represents the menu button on the left controller. Although the binding name has the suffix any, in practice, only the left controller has a menu button. Pressing the menu button on the left controller will trigger this action. After configuring the action, access it in the script and write similar code to handle it. When the menu button is pressed, output a message, Left controller menu button pressed. Back in Unity, reference the test menu action that we just configured. Then let's switch to a different player object. Previously, we used a simplified player object for demonstration, where the controller models were not visible in the scene. Now we'll use the fully featured player object from the official sample package. This player object can render virtual controller models and includes corresponding button animations on the virtual controllers. For example, when you press the trigger button on the physical controller in real life, the trigger button on the virtual controller model will also be pressed visually. Next, I'll change the checking origin mode on the XR origin script to not specified. The specific reason for this was explained in the previous XR origin lesson. While binding the actions earlier, I accidentally bound the parameter for Testa to test menu. After correcting it, the key bindings are now working properly. When running the program, press any button on either controller to activate the controllers. Once activated, you'll see the virtual controller models in the virtual scene. However, the virtual controller model currently doesn't display the menu button for the left controller. In real life, I'll press the menu button on the left controller and everyone can focus on the console output. After pressing it, you'll see this message being displayed: left controller menu button pressed. This confirms that the previously configured key bindings for other buttons are also working correctly.